At some point in every account management professional's career, they reach a point where they're asked to be more strategic. Often they are given this feedback with very little direction or specifics. So, what does it mean? How can you move from focusing on the details, which are critical in a highly regulated industry like ours, to focusing on the big picture? And in some situations, you have to do both. So, how do you do that? In this first section, you will learn the details that will enable you to develop your strategic skills. You'll learn about something called the growth mindset that can propel you to greater success in your future. You'll also learn some common methods for strategic thinking and how to apply that strategic thinking to solve problems, constructing a strategic framework and how to evaluate and optimize strategic ideas and programs. All of these skills will work together to give you the ability to think strategically for your agency teams and your clients. In this first lesson, we're going to explore the definition of strategic thinking and different types of thinking. This may be a new way to think about how your brain works, but the latest brain research has proven that our mind is much more powerful than we have ever imagined. At the end of this section, you will be able to understand the growth mindset and how it is key to strategic thinking, name the different types of thinking styles, be familiar with the latest research on thinking and what it means to your work and your life, explain how strategic thinking works in the process of developing advertising and promotional programs. So let's get started. The way you think is a choice. This may sound counterintuitive. How can you select or choose what you think? It just happens, right? Most of us barely control the thoughts that pass through our mind at any point in time, let alone the way you think. But science has proven otherwise. And if you really start to really focus on it, you'll find truth in this theory. In his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman presented the idea that we each think in two ways, fast and slow. In the fast way of thinking, which is the way we think most of the time, we jump from one snap judgment to another without expending much mental energy. Anyone who has driven home from the store and arrived having almost no memory of the drive home understands this. In fact, we use our fast way of thinking when we drive a lot. Seeing the brake lights in a car in front of us causes us to immediately slam on the brakes. We don't have time to think about it, it just happens. Daniel Kahneman conducted years of research that shows how we all use mental shortcuts to filter information and get us through our days. He also showed us that when we have more complex problems, we tend to use slower thinking styles. It takes more time, more energy, and often more people. We set up meetings, order meals to sustain us during the long hours, and gather different perspectives together. When we think more slowly, we consider the facts, seek out learnings from past experiences, and sometimes seek information from other sources. Now, the result of each type of thinking can be effective. Fast thinking, intuitive reactions by emergency workers save lives. Slow thinking by logistic experts avoids traffic jams and designs more elegant road systems. But sometimes fast thinking causes you to jump to the wrong conclusion, and slow thinking can lead to paralysis by analysis. The biggest learning from Kahneman's work is that when we become aware of how we think, fast and slow, we tend to develop the ability to select the way we think in different situations. We can stop ourselves from jumping to conclusions and slow down when we know we have a bias. We stop overanalyzing a situation when we suspect it isn't worth our time. The main point here is the way we think can be a conscious choice. And just like choosing to take this class, you can choose to think differently. Now, there's also different ways to think, and we'll review different types of thinking. There's actually 5 major types of thinking, and we'll kind of explain them to you so that those types will become part of your strategic thinking toolbox. You can take the type of thinking out and use it when you're faced with a challenge or a new opportunity. Now, we often get stuck in only one way of thinking, usually the way that has served us best in our life or been taught to us when we were young. We can learn new ways of thinking that stretch us beyond what we might at first perceive as possible. Spencer Smith, PhD in neuroscience at the University of California, published a paper in 2013 in Nature about his discovery of neurons. He discovered that the dendrite cells that connect brain cells don't just connect cells. They actually process information while the signals are being transmitted. This discovery means that our brains are about 100 times more powerful than we had previously thought. So no matter what you may think now, you can think differently and in many different ways. Now, no matter what type of thinking you use, strategic thinking is the slow kind of thinking we talked about a few moments ago. This type of thinking requires that we spend more time and energy to work through all the angles and consider the situation from different perspectives. Because of the mental energy involved, it is important to give yourself some space to do this kind of thinking. After a lot of practice, it will come easier, but you will likely always need to take extra time to really work through a challenge strategically. Here's how you can give yourself the space for this kind of thinking. First, plan to work on a strategic challenge over several days. Strategic thinking isn't something that happens the night before or in a brainstorm meeting. You need to give yourself time to process. 2. Actively prepare for a meeting or discussion. If you're going to sit down with your client or team to talk about a strategic issue, be sure to prepare in advance. Set aside some time, even if it's just 20 minutes, to go over the challenge from a different perspective. Use each type of thinking and note down your questions and possible ideas. 3. Get out of your comfort zone. Literally. Get up and walk to another area of the office or take a walk outside. Give your mind a break from the monotony of your office and typical distractions and interruptions. Get up and walk around. It can do wonders for your perspective and it can help you see things differently. Do you believe that you are set in your ways? That's the way you think and learn is bound by the barriers that you were born with? Or do you believe your potential is limitless, that you can learn to think and behave differently? Do you define yourself into a specific bucket? I'm an introvert, or I'm not creative. If so, you may be engaging in a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset and a growth mindset are terms that Carol Dweck, of Stanford psychologist, defined in her book Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. It was published in 2006. In this groundbreaking book, Dweck sets forth the idea that define our personality define our personality directly impacts our success. She was seeking to solve the age-old question of nature versus nurture. Are we born smart or do we become smart? Can we learn beyond our innate IQ? Is IQ even innate or fixed? What is the strongest contributor of success? What she found is critical to strategic thinking and problem solving in general. Dweck discovered in her research that the belief of someone that they were capable of growing and learning was the single most influential factor in their long-term success. She called this belief the growth mindset. So it's easier to see the growth mindset at work. This slide shows a comparison of some common thoughts from a growth mindset on the left and a fixed mindset on the right. So you can read through some of these. There's on the kind of growth mindset, there's challenges that are seen as an opportunity versus on the other side, they're seen as a failure or a problem. The future's unknown and exciting on one side, but it's risky and something to be feared on the other. These types of mindsets and these types of ideas we often have at different times. What's important about the growth mindset is thinking about where you tend to stay most of the time. So chances are you can recognize yourself in these slides, on these different sides. Now, we don't always go in one side or the other. We have different ways that we approach different problems. I have a growth mindset when it comes about my children's academic capabilities, but I have a fixed mindset when it comes to their safety. So I think about, this type of thinking is less about which is right and which is wrong, and which is going to propel you forward in a situation. So the purpose of bringing this up here is to help you understand the right frame of mind you need to put yourself in when learning this technique of strategic thinking. Strategic thinking requires that we use different parts of our brain in different ways of thinking, many of which may be new and uncomfortable for you, and that's okay because your brain is capable of more than you know. It's important at this point that we talk about the stages of learning. You may start to kind of think about strategic thinking, and you may be able to identify a couple of situations where you have thought strategically, and that's great. So if you've enjoyed success in your life and career, if you're taking this course, then I would guess that you have. You've probably done some strategic thinking. And this opportunity and what this lesson here is about with the stages of learning is just make sure that we're reaching the highest level of learning so that you can flex the strategic muscle whenever you need to. Here on this slide, you can see there are 4 stages of learning. Now, it's helpful to review these stages and think about where you are right now so that you will know what you need to do to improve. These stages came from The Dynamics of Life Skills Coaching by Paul Curtis and Philip Warren. In that book, the top 2 stages are flipped to represent how once you learn a skill, you do it almost without thinking. However, I believe it's important to look at the stages of learning in this order when you're learning about thinking differently. So the bottom level, you'll notice, is unconscious incompetent. You aren't thinking strategically, but you don't notice it. You may not even understand that others around you are thinking differently. Younger account management team members sometimes recognize that executives and senior level people, listen differently and have a different kind of conversation versus the conversations they're having, but they may not be aware that this is more than just because of their position. At some point, you become aware that there are strategic conversations happening and you're not being included. Now, maybe the account manager even told you that you need to be more strategic in your review. So if you're aware there is something you need to do but you aren't sure how to go about it, this means you're in the conscious incompetent stage. You're conscious that you need to work on something. This stage feels really, really awful. You may feel panicked and unsure how to proceed, or worried about what if you can't figure it out and how to be strategic, and basically kind of floundering for an answer. And it may have been this feeling actually that led you to take this course. The next stage, and what will happen here in this course, is focus on these next 2 stages. This next stage is important to know because it's unconscious competence. So now you start to recognize that maybe you've done some strategic thinking in the past. Maybe someone commented about something that you said was smart strategic thinking, but you have no idea exactly what you said or did. This stage, it feels slightly better than conscious and competent. You're getting a lot of positive reinforcement, but you have no idea how to repeat it over time. So the last stage is the one that we want to get to today. This is the conscious competence stage. This means you know how to think strategically. You've got a proven framework that you use to approach problems and challenges. It also means that you reflect on what you've worked for you and what didn't. You note how you can improve. So you not only understand how to think strategically, you know how to continuously get better. That's the biggest difference between building a skill and learning how to think differently. At some point, you want to be able to perform a skill automatically. But when it comes to thinking, it's useful to understand how to reflect and improve. So, thinking 2 to 3 steps ahead is what strategic thinking is all about. If you look at this image, you've got a little boy that's distracted on his bicycle, and there's a little cat that's sunning itself on the sidewalk there. You really don't want to have the little boy hit the cat. That doesn't sound like a good idea for either one of them. So you want to make sure that the little boy's looking and thinking ahead of where he is now. So when researchers have hypothesized about how human beings developed their thinking abilities, they point out the act of hunting. Humans were not as fast as their prey. We're not as easily camouflaged. We didn't have as strong a sense of smell or sight. So how could we win? Well, we won and our ancestors won by outthinking the prey. Our ancestors used their ability to imagine and empathize with the animal to anticipate its movement and track it. They thought several moves ahead. Where would it go? Is it tired? Where would it rest? When would it get hungry? This is at the heart of strategic thinking. It's the very essence of what it means to be human. Lateral thinking was introduced by Edward de Bono in his 1970 book called Lateral Thinking. Now, it's the method of solving a challenge by looking at it in a new way. It encourages an indirect approach to problem solving and involves using your imagination to see a situation from a new angle or envision a different interpretation of the factors at play. So it encourages you to really step away from the logical step-by-step approach and solve challenges through relaxing your judgment on what you think is the problem and expanding your perspective. A lot of times we think about strategy and we think about military strategy. Well, what's one of the common things military strategists do? They get higher up so that they can see the situation from a different perspective. They'll either have a map where they're thinking about their locations, like you see here, or on the battlefield, they look to control the higher ground so that they can see more. That's what strategy is all about. Now, Edward de Bono said in his 1970 book, Lateral Thinking, that there are 4 steps. The first step is to let go of the assumptions that are being made about what's happening or what the cause might be. The second step is to challenge the conventional thinking, constructively, of course, but ask some questions. And the third thing is to search for different ways of looking at the problem. And lastly, explore how these different perspectives could provide a new insight or solution. So let's take an example. Your client wants to know why the advertising campaign isn't working. You have analyzed the message and ensured that the ads are running correctly. You can even see in the Google Analytics report that people are clicking on the digital ad and going to the website. In fact, the activity seems to be increasing, but the prescription numbers are not. So what's wrong? Now, a logical, tactical thinker would get stuck at this point and possibly dive deeper into the message or want to increase the amount of spend on the ad campaign to reach more people. The strategic thinker uses a lateral thinking approach to examine the problem from different perspectives. Who are the people clicking on the ad? What are their demographics? Are they even the right people? What is going on outside of the campaign itself? Is there access to the drug and managed care formularies? Or are patients having to pay a high price at the pharmacy and maybe walking away? What about the physicians? When patients ask them about the product, are they being given a prescription for something else? Is the physician discouraging them? The purpose of an advertising campaign is to increase awareness and interest in a product and to prompt a person to take action. The campaign informs and motivates. It does not sell the product. That process is different and comes after the advertising has motivated the patient to take action. Often pharma brand marketers forget about the separate nature of these two processes. That doesn't mean you're off the hook, however. As a partner in promoting the product, it's your job to ask smart questions and determine what the actual problem is and then come up with solutions with your client. In this case, based on a real example from my work in pharma advertising, we learned that the patients were going to the pharmacy to get their prescription, but the pharmacy didn't have it in stock. Patients displayed an unexpected reluctance to wait and ended up walking away from the treatment. To uncover this learning, we had to conduct patient journey research to learn what was happening at each point. It didn't show up in the data, and it wasn't something that we would have expected from previous patient journey research. But by thinking laterally, we were able to identify the exact cause and put a plan in place to fix the issue. So let's talk now about some common thinking types. Strategic thinking requires the use of many different styles of thinking to get the best ideas and look at the problem or challenge from all angles. Here are just a few common types of thinking that you can use when tackling a strategic problem. The first is critical thinking. Now, critical thinking is one of the most often misunderstood types of thinking. The theory of criticism is based on gathering information, logically analyzing objective data, and then evaluating clear results. It's linear in structure and complete in its approach. It's founded in our ability to reason. However, many people think of critical thinking as judgment. Judgment may be part of the process, but judging is not the focus or the intended outcome. Judging is grounded in ego, fear, and the need to be right. This isn't how critical thinking is supposed to work. In our common language, to be critical is to be negative and to find the weaknesses or poor aspects of any idea or cut it down. Strategic thinking uses critical thinking in the way that early philosophers like Plato intended. It's the process of thinking logically, looking at objective data, putting a process to analyze and evaluate options to find a solution. The next is conceptual thinking. Conceptual thinking is all about envisioning a path from point A to point B. It's about finding connections, but also identifying patterns. This type of thinking is excellent at tackling abstract ideas. When faced with a problem that's particularly difficult, conceptual thinking can often help find the answers. If you want to figure out how to position a product in a market where they have no competitive differentiation, conceptual thinking will help identify unique connections and find patterns in unmet needs. Conceptual thinking will match up elements from different areas to create a strong strategy, like the color of a pill used to increase awareness and be memorable, like in Nexium's Purple Pill campaign. The next type of thinking is innovative thinking. Now, why is there a pillow on this page? Well, my first experience with innovative thinking involved a pillow. As a child, my mother was famous for keeping us kids in bed by telling us that we had to keep our head on the pillow. This rule prevented us from getting out of bed and kept us in our place, right up until my 7-year-old mind realized that there was nothing in the rule about keeping the pillow on the bed. I gleefully picked up my pillow, put it on my head, and danced around the room in celebration, and much to the delight of my little sister. My mother stopped our fun, of course, but I've always remembered that brainstorm of a moment. Innovative thinking is like that. You generate ways of pushing boundaries and questioning the rules. The important thing to know about being innovative is that it doesn't always mean inventing, it means improving and developing new solutions to meet challenging needs. Innovative thinking can be accomplished through several techniques that we'll learn about in another lesson, but for now we need to understand that innovation deals with what you have and involves putting it together in a new way. Steve Jobs didn't invent a totally new iPhone. He took the iPod, the mobile phone, and the digital camera and put them all together. That is innovation. Amazon creating Alexa is invention. The next type of thinking is intuitive thinking. This is just really a sense or a feeling. It doesn't use a rational process. This is your gut. Good intuition is based on years of knowledge and experience that allows you to understand how people in the world works. Many situations are just intuitive. Intuitive thinking is something really special. It occurs when you use all the accumulated experience that you have to just know what the right thing is to do. Now, we've all had times when intuition has taken over. We can't logically or consciously explain it, but we're certain that a course of action is right. When you are strategically planning and guiding, the key is to know when you are getting an intuitive sense and evaluate where it's coming from. Is there a previous brand you've worked on which is leading you to believe a certain action is incorrect? What is the background of your gut instinct? Intuitive thinking is fine to call out when working with a team. Feel free to acknowledge the feeling you're having. I'm not sure how to explain it, but I think this is the wrong approach. Often your teammates can help you identify why you're feeling this way. Since intuitive thinking comes from the combination of experience and data, it's often a conclusion you jump to. This is the fast thinking in its finest form. It saves lives in the emergency room and causes many people to discriminate in ways that are unfair. So there's good and bad on both sides. The trick is knowing when you need to curb your intuitive thinking and slow down. One way to do this is to evaluate the conclusion you've jumped to see if you feel the same way upon reflection. If not, change your opinion or action, or ask for input from others. Now, the last type of thinking that we'll talk about is called implementation thinking. Implementation thinking is often discouraged and sometimes discounted as not being strategic, but that could not be further from the truth. The ability to know how tactical decisions ladder up to big strategic programs makes or breaks advertising campaigns. Getting ready to send an email campaign and you're asked to weigh in on a last-minute change to the email list? That's a decision that can dramatically affect the strategic effect of that campaign. Implementation thinking are often where the power of the strategy is pulled through into action. Implementation thinking identifies how to organize ideas and plan for the effective rollout of a program. That completes this introductory session on strategic thinking. I hope you've gained an appreciation for the special opportunities strategic thinking affords you in your life and your career. Now let's move forward to the next lesson where we can learn some of the common approaches we can use to spur strategic thinking.